Let me offer one piece of advice: never grab a human by the collar. Graf tried that, and we are still scraping his teeth off the deck. Listen, I have been working station security for almost 12 cycles now, and I can tell you this: I have encountered every kind of fool the galaxy can produce. My name is Vex, and I am what you might call a professional problem solver. That is the polite description. To be honest, I am the one who throws intoxicated cargo haulers out of bars and ensures no one starts a plasma fire in the docking bays. I am Croth, 7 feet 2 inches of muscle, bone plating, and what my supervisor politely refers to as a naturally assertive personality. What she really means is that my species evolved on a high-gravity world where everything wanted to kill us. As a result, we became very, very good at striking first and striking hard. Our skeletal structure is dense enough to stop most small-caliber rounds, and our muscle fibers operate at roughly 3 times the efficiency of the galactic average. In simple terms, we are built for violence, which makes us well-suited for station security work. Trading Station Calera 9 is not exactly a hub of refined civilization. It is closer to the armpit of civilized space, if we are being truthful. We process around 40,000 transient visitors per rotation, mostly haulers, traders, smugglers who are not quite skilled enough, and tourists who clearly made some questionable decisions. My responsibility is to keep them from killing one another, or at least to ensure they do so without damaging station infrastructure. You would be surprised how costly hull repairs can be. The station itself is a rotating wheel, standard design, nothing particularly impressive. Spokes extend outward from the central hub, like the legs of a mechanical spider. The outer ring contains all the entertainment. Markets, cantas, pleasure halls, fighting pits, and roughly 6,000 different places where people can make poor choices. Gravity on the outer ring sits at 0.9 standard, which is comfortable for most species. Not quite heavy enough for me to feel fully at ease, but I adapt. Security headquarters is located in Spoke 7, giving us fast access to nearly everywhere that matters. My shift begins at 2200 station time, which is usually when activity starts to pick up. That is when cargo haulers finish loading and head to the cantas, their pay credits burning holes in their pockets. That is when gamblers grow desperate. That is when people start convincing themselves that violence will fix their problems. Spoiler alert, it usually does not. But that rarely stops them from trying. I have worked alongside many different species over the cycles. Daki, with their extra forearms and superiority issues. Mueller, who breathe methane and believe that makes them unique. Nari traders, with compound eyes and a chittering language that sounds like someone crushing bubble wrap. The point is, you learn quickly which species need close attention, which are mostly talk, and which will actually fight when pushed. And then, about 2 standard months ago, the humans arrived. The humans. The first time I saw the bulletin announcing Earth being added to the registered trade worlds list, I barely noticed. Just another backwater planet full of primitives who had finally figured out faster-than-light travel, something that happens every few cycles. They arrived full of excitement about joining the galactic community. It did not take long for them to realize that no one really cared about their small homeworld. After that, they settled into the dull routine of interstellar trade. Nothing unusual there. What made the humans interesting, at least to my colleagues in security, was how extremely fragile they appeared. Honestly, when the first human trade delegation reached Calera 9, half of the security staff could barely stop laughing. They were small. Average height around 5.5 feet. Slim bone structure, no natural armor, no claws, no venom glands, no bioelectric abilities, nothing. Just soft pink or brown skin stretched over what looked like the least impressive skeleton in the galaxy. They came from a garden world. My partner Ralph kept repeating this while laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Ralph is a Mueller, built like a boulder with legs, and he found the situation endlessly amusing. "Look at them, Vex," he said. "They probably evolved eating fruit and running from real predators." I had to admit he was not entirely wrong. According to the registration files, Earth was rated as a Class 7 world. Nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, 1 large moon, liquid water, oceans, and an average surface temperature well within a comfortable range. Standard gravity at 1.0. Everything about it suggested an easy environment. It was no surprise the humans appeared so soft. Within a week of their arrival, a betting pool started circulating through the security department. The question was not whether a human would be badly injured in a station dispute, it was when it would happen. Ralph bet on fewer than 10 rotations. I gave them 20, mostly because I tend to be optimistic. Our supervisor, Kelna, refused to join on ethical grounds, but I saw her quietly hand Ralph 20 credits and whisper 8 rotations when she thought no one noticed. The humans, poor naive souls, seemed completely unaware that nearly every other species on the station saw them as easy targets. They calmly set up their small trade office in the commercial district. They smiled at everyone with those strange, flat teeth. They were courteous. They said, please, and thank you. They followed every station rule as if they feared punishment. It was almost endearing, like watching young Kelrath attempt to hunt before learning which end of their prey can bite. Most activity on Kelleran 9 takes place in the Kantas, and there are roughly 24 scattered around the outer ring. But the one that matters, the place where reputations are built and destroyed, is called the Gravity Well. It is a terrible name, offers decent drinks, and has absolutely no tolerance for dull behavior. The owner, a Thranaki named Court, encourages what he refers to as spirited disagreements, because violence is good for business as long as the furniture remains intact. He does not care if someone's face gets rearranged. The Gravity Well is where I spend most of my shift. Usually not inside, but close enough to respond when things get out of control, which happens often. I have lost track of how many times I have had to pull someone out in restraints. That is simply part of the job. Here is the thing about the Gravity Well, it is also where dominance is established. If you are new to the station and want others to know you are not to be tested, you show up there. You claim space. You make noise. Maybe you start a fight with someone smaller and make sure everyone sees you win. So when the humans began appearing at the Gravity Well during off-duty hours, everyone noticed. Not because they were impressive, but because they looked like prey. I remember the first time I saw one walk in. A human male, around 30 standard years old, wearing a plain gray jumpsuit with an Earth flag patch on the shoulder. He went to the bar, ordered something called whiskey, which I later learned is a human intoxicant, and sat there drinking alone, bothering no one. Ralph nudged me in the ribs. How long do you think before someone messes with him? Maybe they will leave him alone, I said, without much confidence. You do not really believe that? No, I do not. But surprisingly, that first night, nothing happened. The human finished his drink, paid his bill, and left. No incidents. No trouble. Ralph complained that his entertainment had been spoiled. It was only later, after everything went wrong, that I understood what we were actually witnessing that night. It was not that people left the human alone out of respect or kindness. They were watching. Waiting. Studying. Predators do not rush in blindly. They observe first. They search for weakness. And everyone was completely convinced that humans were weak. We were very, very wrong. The human trade delegation consisted of about 15 individuals, rotating through the station in shifts. Most of them were unremarkable, polite, quiet, efficiently boring. They negotiated their cargo contracts. They paid their docking fees on schedule and caused no disturbances, which, to be honest, made them some of the best visitors we received. I almost began to appreciate them in the way one might appreciate a well-trained pet. But then there was Victoria Reeves. The first time I noticed her, she was moving through the main concourse with a data pad in one hand and a thermal container in the other. Coffee, as I later learned. Humans are particularly attached to it. She was small, even by human standards, perhaps around 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slim frame and dark hair pulled back into what they call a ponytail. She wore the same gray jumpsuit as the rest of her delegation and carried an expression that suggested she was holding back laughter at some private thought. By station standards, she was entirely unremarkable. I have seen cargo containers that appeared more threatening. Her arms were thin, with no obvious muscle definition. Her hands looked small and delicate. Everything about her physical presence suggested fragility, something breakable and weak. Placed beside almost any other species on Calera 9, she would have looked more suited to a habitat enclosure than walking freely without supervision. Ralph noticed her before I did. He stopped speaking mid-sentence, stared, and then began laughing so hard he had to brace himself against a wall. That is a human. Vex, are you seeing this? I have sneezed things that looked more dangerous. Even Kelna, who usually maintains strict professional composure, raised one of her facial ridges in what I can only describe as concerned sympathy. How did they survive long enough to reach space, she muttered. Natural selection should have removed them in the first generation. I watched Victoria pass a group of Nari traders who barely acknowledged her, dismissing her as insignificant. She did not seem to notice or care. She continued on with that faint smile, sipping her coffee, completely relaxed. And this was my thought as I observed her, this is what happens when evolution has been easy on a species. Earth must be a paradise world where little ever goes wrong. Mild climate, abundant food, no serious predators. Humans never needed to develop real survival traits. They are the result of a species with no pressure to become strong, fast, or dangerous. Garden world offspring. I actually felt some sympathy for them. Over the following weeks, I began to see Victoria more frequently. She appeared to be the delegation's primary negotiator, which meant she spent considerable time in the commercial district. I watched her bargain with a Thranaki spice merchant who attempted to overcharge her by 400%. Within 5 minutes, she had brought the price down to a fair rate, smiling the entire time. The Thranaki looked bewildered afterward, as if he was unsure how he had lost control of the exchange. I saw her assist a Kelrath engineer who dropped a container of micro-components across the deck plating. She knelt down and spent 20 minutes helping him retrieve the tiny parts, even though it was neither her responsibility nor her mistake. I also saw her stop an argument between two intoxicated Malar cargo haulers simply by standing between them and speaking in a calm, reasonable tone until both became embarrassed and left. From what I could tell, she was deliberately kind, which made what eventually occurred even more surprising. But I am moving ahead too quickly. There are certain individuals on Calera 9 that everyone recognizes, not because they are influential or respected, but because they cause trouble. These are the kinds of issues security must address regularly. Essentially bullies who rely on their size and strength to intimidate smaller species, staying just within the limits so we cannot permanently ban them from the station. Grath was one of those problems. Grath is Krago like me, but that is where the similarities end, since I at least attempt to maintain professional standards. Grath is simply unpleasant, 7 feet 4 inches of hostility and even worse hygiene. He works as a freelance cargo hauler, meaning he loads and unloads shipments for anyone willing to pay. It is demanding physical work, and Grath is very capable at it. It was also far below his own inflated sense of importance in the universe. He had been ejected from the gravity well 11 times in the last cycle alone. Most of those incidents were for starting fights, never for finishing them, because Grath was clever enough to target those smaller than himself. Milari traders, Kelrath engineers, anyone who would not, or could not, fight back effectively. He took pleasure in watching people tense up when he moved toward them. Security had submitted reports. Station management had issued warnings. Yet Grath never quite crossed the boundary far enough to justify permanent removal. He always stayed just inside the rules, and he was fully aware of it. I had personally pulled him away from 3 different individuals and delivered the standard lecture on acceptable conduct. Each time, he apologized, paid whatever minor fine was assigned, and then repeated the behavior 2 weeks later. Everyone disliked Grath, but everyone was also slightly afraid of him, which was exactly the balance he preferred. The first time I saw Grath notice the humans, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. I recognized that look. It was the expression of a predator spotting injured prey. He was sitting in the gravity well, already 3 drinks into what was clearly going to become a bad night. Then Victoria walked past the entrance with 2 other humans. They were laughing about something, completely unaware of the risk. Grath watched them pass. Then he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Hey, Vex," Ralph said quietly. He had noticed it too. "Should we, warn them?" I considered it. Technically, nothing had happened yet. We could not detain someone for simply looking at another person. And maybe, just maybe, Grath would show enough restraint to leave them alone. But I knew better. I had worked station security long enough to recognize the pattern. Grath had chosen his next target. The only uncertainty was timing, not outcome. I should have acted immediately. Filed a preemptive report. Assigned additional patrols. Done something. But I did not. Honestly, I assumed the worst result would be a human getting frightened, filing a complaint, and station management finally having sufficient cause to ban Grath permanently. Problem solved. What I failed to consider, even briefly, was that I might have the situation completely wrong. It happened during a night cycle about 3 weeks after the humans first arrived. The gravity well was crowded, which is never a positive sign. When you pack 200 beings from 40 different species into a space designed for perhaps half that number, then add alcohol, gambling, and music focused more on volume than melody, you create a pressure chamber for poor decisions. I was standing near the entrance, conducting my usual scan of the room. Court, the bar's owner, gave me a nod from behind the counter. He understood the routine. I remained visible. He kept serving drinks. We both maintained the illusion that this was a respectable establishment. The air smelled like a chemical factory accident, the result of mixing intoxicants and pheromones from dozens of species in a poorly ventilated space. Grath was at his usual table in the back corner, already intoxicated. I could tell from the way he leaned too far forward and spoke too loudly to the 3 other cargo haulers with him. They were laughing at something. It was that specific kind of cruel laughter that often comes right before someone gets hurt. I made a mental note to watch them closely. That was when Victoria entered. She was not alone. 2 other humans accompanied her, both male, both slightly taller than her, though still small by station standards. One was named Marcus, I had reviewed his registration earlier. The other was unfamiliar to me. They moved toward the bar, navigating the crowd with careful politeness that clearly marked them as newcomers. Victoria was still carrying that thermal container. More coffee. I wondered briefly if she ever stopped drinking it. They found room at the bar and ordered drinks. Human alcohol, I assumed, since they had begun importing their own beverages after learning that most station intoxicants either had no effect on them or made them severely ill. They spoke among themselves, bothering no one, just 3 coworkers relaxing after a shift. Grath noticed them immediately. I saw him straighten, that predatory focus cutting through the haze of alcohol. He said something to his companions that made them all turn to stare at the humans. The laughter returned, louder this time. One of them, a Croth named Drell, shook his head, as if cautioning Grath. Drell was a sensible individual. Unfortunately, Grath was not sensible when sober, and he was certainly not sensible when drunk. Grath stood up. All 7 feet 4 inches of him. He swayed slightly, which made him more dangerous rather than less. Intoxicated people are unpredictable. Intoxicated bullies are worse. I began moving toward him, but the crowd was dense, and I was still about 30 feet away. When Grath reached the bar, he positioned himself directly behind Victoria, close enough that she could not ignore his presence. She did. She turned, looked up at him, and I saw her expression change from relaxed to alert in less than a second. Well, Grath said, his voice cutting through the noise of the cantina. Several nearby conversations stopped. People turned to watch. Everyone enjoys a spectacle. Look what we have here, humans, the well-known garden world weaklings. Victoria glanced at her companions, then back at Grath. When she spoke, her voice was steady, almost polite. Hello. We're just having a drink, not looking for trouble. Grath laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Trouble? You think you'd recognize trouble if it bit you? Look at you. You're tiny. What are you, someone's pet? The 2 human men stiffened. Marcus placed a hand on Victoria's shoulder, as if preparing to step in front of her. She gave a slight shake of her head, a quiet signal between them. Marcus stepped back, though his expression showed clear irritation. Listen, Victoria said, maintaining the same calm tone. I understand you've probably had a bit too much to drink. Why don't we just go our separate ways? No harm done. We can all get back to enjoying the evening. Wrong choice. Grath took her calmness as fear and her diplomacy as weakness. His smile spread wider, revealing far too many teeth. Oh, you understand. How generous. How weak. You know your problem, human? You're soft. Your entire species is soft. You come onto our station, walk around like you belong here, but you're nothing. Nothing. I was close now, moving through the crowd. I could see exactly where this was heading, and I needed to step in before Grath made physical contact. Station regulations are clear, security can detain individuals for threatening behavior, but our authority increases once contact occurs. I was hoping to stop this while it was still verbal. Victoria took a step back, hands raised in a calming gesture. All right? You've made your point. We're leaving. She turned to go. That was when Grath made his mistake. He moved quickly for someone his size and grabbed the collar of her jumpsuit. The intent was obvious, to lift her, humiliate her in front of the entire cantina, and establish dominance in the most physical way possible. I had seen him do this before to Vari traders: grab, lift, shake slightly, then drop. Terrifying for the victim, entertaining for the crowd, and just short of violence that would bring serious charges. His hand closed on the fabric of her collar, and then everything went wrong. Literally. One moment, Grath was reaching for Victoria. The next, he was rotating sideways through the air. It happened so fast my mind couldn't track the individual movements. All I saw was Victoria moving, her body dropping and twisting, her hands rising in a motion far too precise to be accidental. And then Grath was airborne. 7 feet 4 inches, close to 400 pounds, airborne. He slammed into a table occupied by 3 Malar traders. The table shattered. Drinks scattered. The Malar scrambled away, screaming in their high-pitched language. Grath struck the deck plating with a sound like a cargo container dropped from a loading crane. The entire cantina went silent. Completely silent. Even the music seemed to stop, though that may have been my perception. 200 beings from 40 different species stood frozen, all staring at the small human woman now standing in a very deliberate stance, weight balanced, hands raised, looking down at Grath with what I can only describe as mild annoyance. Grath groaned and tried to push himself up. His right arm, the one that had grabbed Victoria, was bent at an angle arms are not meant to bend. Even from my position, I could see bone pressing against the skin. A compound fracture. A serious one. He looked up at Victoria, and for the first time in all the cycles I had known him, I saw genuine fear in Grath's eyes. Victoria tilted her head slightly, as if thinking something over. When she spoke, her voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it now, something cold. I tried to warn you. I really did. But you just had to grab me, didn't you? Grath opened his mouth. Maybe to apologize. Maybe to threaten. I'll never know, because Victoria moved again. This time, I saw it clearly. She stepped forward, her foot rising in a motion that was remarkably efficient, and struck him directly in the jaw. The sound was like a gunshot. Grath's head snapped back. Several teeth flew from his mouth, flashing in the cantina lights before clattering across the floor. His jaw made a crunching sound I felt in my own bones. He collapsed unconscious before hitting the deck. Victoria lowered her foot, brushed off her jumpsuit, and picked up her thermal container from where she had placed it on the bar. She took a sip of her coffee, then looked directly at me. Sorry about the mess, she said. I'll pay for the table. I need to pause here, because what I just described doesn't fully capture what happened. My mind was trying to process events in real time, and frankly, it failed. So let me explain what Victoria actually did, as best as I understand it. I've spent weeks reviewing security footage and consulting medical staff, and I still find it hard to believe. When Grath grabbed her collar, Victoria didn't pull away. That's the first part that defies logic. Every instinct should have told her to retreat, but she didn't. Instead, she moved toward him, lowering her center of gravity and rotating her entire body in one smooth motion. Her hands came up, one securing his wrist, the other his elbow, and she redirected his momentum. This is where the physics matter. Grath outweighed Victoria by roughly 250 pounds. He was taller, stronger, and had bone density capable of absorbing most blunt force impacts. By any reasonable calculation, he should have been able to do whatever he wanted, lift her, throw her, anything. But Victoria didn't try to overpower him. She redirected him. She turned his grip into a lever, his arm into a pivot point, and his own body weight into the force that launched him. It wasn't her strength that sent him flying. It was his. The technique is known as a hip throw, I later learned. Humans have dozens of martial arts systems, developed over thousands of years, designed specifically to allow smaller individuals to defeat larger opponents. Victoria had trained in one called judo since she was 6 years old, over 20 years of practice, muscle memory so ingrained it functioned like instinct. By the time Grath hit the table, his arm was already damaged. The throw had hyperextended his elbow, and the impact completed the injury. The radius, the forearm bone, snapped cleanly. The ulna, however, didn't break cleanly. It fractured lengthwise, and the jagged end tore through muscle and skin, resulting in what medical staff classify as a compound fracture. It was, by any standard, a severe injury. There was blood, quite a lot of it, and the bone was exposed, which is never a positive sign for any species. Grath was still conscious enough to scream. The sound was high and sharp, completely disproportionate to his size. Victoria stood there, watching him attempt to rise. Her face showed no emotion at all. That was the moment I should have stepped in. I should have called for medical support and placed myself between them, but I could not move. I was frozen in place, my mind struggling to reconcile what I had just seen with everything I believed I understood about humans. Grath managed to reach his knees, clutching his destroyed arm. He looked up at Victoria with fear in his eyes, mixed with anger and humiliation. He was about to speak, most likely another threat, because Grath has never been intelligent enough to recognize when to stop. Victoria did not allow him the opportunity. She stepped forward, and the movement was so casual it almost appeared careless. Her right foot lifted from the deck in a smooth arc, gathering momentum, then snapped forward with her full body weight behind it. Her boot, standard station issue, probably size 6.5, connected with Grath's jaw at what the medical report later estimated to be around 40 miles per hour. I later learned that the human body can generate tremendous striking force when properly trained. The leg muscles are the strongest muscle group in the body. The hips rotate to add torque. The entire kinetic chain, from the ground through the foot to the point of impact, transfers energy far beyond what you would expect from something that looks so small and fragile. Victoria's kick delivered roughly 800 pounds of force. I know this because the medical team assessed the injuries and worked backward. Grath's jaw did not simply break, it shattered. 3 teeth were expelled instantly, flying across the cantina like small calcium fragments. 2 more cracked at the root and required later extraction. His jawbone fractured in 4 places. The mandibular condyle, the joint connecting the jaw to the skull, fully dislocated on the left side. The sound was like dropping a crate of glass containers onto a hard floor, sharp, wet, and crushing. Grath collapsed as if his power had been cut. His eyes rolled back, his body went slack, and he fell face-first onto the deck plating. Blood pooled beneath his head, mixing with spilled drinks and shattered glass from the destroyed table. Victoria stood over him for about 3 seconds, watching to ensure he did not rise again. Then she turned, walked back to the bar, picked up her coffee, took a sip, grimaced slightly as if it had gone cold, and set it down. The silence in the gravity well was complete. You could have heard a pin drop, or even someone considering dropping one. 200 beings stood motionless, not a single sound among them. Every eye was fixed on this small human woman who had just dismantled a Kragath enforcer as if he were made of cheap packing material. Then someone, possibly one of the Mueller whose table had been destroyed, started laughing. It was nervous, high-pitched laughter, but it broke the tension. Instantly, the room erupted, the noise rising from nothing to overwhelming in seconds. I finally forced my body to respond and pushed through the crowd toward Graf. He was still breathing, which was encouraging. His pulse was strong, also encouraging, but he was clearly unconscious and the blood loss was alarming. I activated my comm unit. Security to medical. Gravity well cantina. Priority response. 1 Krago male unconscious. Significant facial and arm trauma. Possible concussion. The response came within 5 seconds. Medical team en route. Root, what happened? I looked at Victoria, who was now speaking quietly with Marcus and the other human. None of them appeared surprised. That was what stood out to me. Marcus looked concerned, but not shocked. The other human was actually smiling slightly, as if this were a typical Friday night. He picked a fight with the wrong person, I said into the comm. Ralph appeared beside me, staring at Graf, then at Victoria, then back at Graf. What just happened? Did that human really do that? Yes, I said. She did. But she's tiny. Maybe 100 pounds. He's Krav Vex. One of us. How did a human do that? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The medical team arrived within 3 minutes, 2 Kelrath medics and a Thranaki trauma specialist. They took one look at Graf and immediately requested a stretcher. The Thranaki female, Slith, someone I had worked with before, whistled through her mandibles. Looks like someone hit him with a cargo loader, she said. No, I replied, pointing at Victoria. Her. Slith looked at Victoria, then at me, then back again. You're joking. I wish I were. They loaded Graf onto the stretcher, stabilized his arm, and fitted a cervical collar to prevent movement of his shattered jaw. He began to regain consciousness as they lifted him, groaning through his ruined mouth. The sound was miserable. Slith administered a sedative, and he fell silent again. As they carried him out, I approached Victoria. My hand rested on my stun baton, not because I expected to use it, but because protocol required it when approaching someone who had just committed violence. Up close, she appeared even less imposing. Perhaps 120 pounds at most. No visible weapons, no armor, just a human in a gray jumpsuit holding cold coffee. Ma'am, I said, keeping my tone professional, I need you to come with me to security headquarters. We'll need a statement regarding what happened. She nodded calmly. Of course. That's reasonable. Do I need legal representation? That's your right, but this is only a preliminary statement. You are not under arrest. Yet, she said with a slight smile. Yet, I agreed. Marcus stepped forward. Vex, right? I've seen you around. Grath grabbed her first. At least 50 witnesses saw him initiate contact. This was self-defense. I understand, I said. But procedures still apply. Victoria placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. It's fine. I'll give my statement. You two go back to the quarters. Let Captain Harrison know what happened. He'll want to file a formal report with station management. You sure? Marcus asked. Completely. As we exited the gravity well, I felt every eye follow us. The crowd parted without instruction. People stepped back as Victoria passed, as if she were radioactive. In the corridor, she spoke first. Is he going to be okay? Graf, I mean. Probably, I said. Broken jaw, broken arm, concussion. He'll recover. Good, she replied. I didn't want to kill him. Just make a point. You definitely did. What was that, exactly? What did you do to him? Victoria looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something other than calm professionalism. She looked tired, maybe a little sad. Judo and Muay Thai, she said. I've trained since I was a kid. My parents thought it would help with confidence. Turns out it's also useful for dealing with bullies who don't understand the word no. That wasn't just training, I said. I've never seen anyone move like that. She shrugged. Where I come from, you learn to defend yourself. The universe isn't always kind to people who look easy to push around. That was when I first began to realize that maybe, just maybe, we had been completely wrong about humans. After I took Victoria's statement, concise, accurate, and delivered without emotional embellishment, I did something I should have done 3 weeks earlier. I read the full registration file on Earth and its inhabitants. Not the summary. The entire file. All 247 pages. It was educational in the most unsettling way possible. Earth is classified as a Class 7 world. That much I knew. What I didn't know, what apparently no one bothered to read, was the subcategory. On page 3, in standard galactic font, was a notation that should have been highlighted, underlined, and possibly set on fire for emphasis: Death World, Category 12 out of 12. I had to look up what that meant. In 12 cycles of station security work, I had never encountered the term. The Galactic Environmental Database defines a death world as a planet where environmental conditions, predator density, disease load, or evolutionary pressure create extreme danger for the dominant species. Category 12 is the highest rating. It means that by galactic standards, Earth is actively trying to kill everything living on it. To understand how badly we misjudged things, consider a few highlights. Earth's gravity is 1.0 standard. That sounds normal, comfortable. But the report notes, in restrained academic language, that 1.0 sits at the upper limit of the comfort range. Most garden worlds are closer to 0.8 or 0.9. Humans evolved under constant pressure 10 to 20% higher than what most species consider normal. Their bone density reflects this. Their muscles are optimized to fight gravity every day of their lives. Earth's atmosphere contains 21% oxygen, flagged as unusually high. High oxygen levels support larger organisms and more energetic metabolisms. They also make combustion easier, which evidently was not a problem for Earth's evolutionary path. Everything there adapted to survive it. Humans metabolize energy rapidly. Their endurance is exceptional. They can run for hours if necessary. And then there is Earth's predator load. Thousands of apex predators, many of which still see humans as potential prey. Humans did not evolve in a protected or forgiving ecological niche. They developed in constant competition with animals equipped with claws, fangs, venom, and millions of years of refined hunting ability. So how did humans survive? They became intelligent. They learned cooperation. And they became exceptionally capable of violence when required. The report contained a list of Earth's most dangerous species. I stopped after the first page because it was genuinely unsettling. Massive reptiles capable of running at 40 miles per hour. Large cats weighing over 600 pounds that can kill with a single bite. Bears, there were 3 full paragraphs about bears. According to the report, they are omnivorous mammals that can reach 1,500 pounds, run up to 30 miles per hour, and have been known to fight humans over food resources. And, improbably, humans sometimes win. Then there were the environmental threats: earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, and temperature swings ranging from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius depending on region and season. Humans built their entire civilization on a planet that regularly attempts to destroy them through natural disasters. But the detail that truly unsettled me, the one that made me lean back and stare at the wall for 10 minutes, was this: humans are not even the apex predator on their own world. They sit somewhere in the middle of the food chain. They survived and eventually dominated through intelligence, cooperation, and a harsh pragmatism shaped by 10,000 generations of being both hunter and hunted. Every human on this station descends from survivors, not from beings born into ease, but from those who fought daily against a planet that was openly hostile to their survival. And we thought they were weak. We assumed they were soft. We believed they were sheltered inhabitants of a garden world who simply benefited from advanced technology. I began replaying every interaction I had observed with humans over the previous 3 weeks. Victoria helping a Kelrath engineer gather dropped components. I had thought she was just being polite. I now understood that she was exercising remarkable restraint. She could have ignored him. She could have shown irritation. Instead, she chose kindness, even though her instincts likely warned that appearing vulnerable could be dangerous. The human who was mocked in the gravity well on the first night did not respond or retaliate. I assumed he was afraid. I later realized he was disciplined. He chose not to answer violence with violence, even though he was capable of doing so. Every courteous exchange, every diplomatic concession, every moment a human stepped back from confrontation was not weakness, it was control. It was the behavior of a species that learned restraint because uncontrolled aggression on a lethal world leads to extinction. The report also included physiological data. Trained humans have an average reaction time of around 0.25 seconds. Their hand-eye coordination is exceptional, likely evolved for throwing weapons at both prey and threats. Their ability to process multiple dangers at once ranks among the highest recorded in any sapient species. They possess binocular vision designed for tracking fast-moving targets. Their vestibular system, which governs balance, is highly developed due to their evolution as bipedal hunters across uneven terrain. There was another notable detail. Humans experience a stress response known as adrenaline. Under threat, their bodies release chemicals that temporarily increase strength, speed, pain tolerance, and reaction time. It is essentially a natural combat enhancer. A human in a full adrenaline state can ignore injuries that would incapacitate most species and continue functioning. Victoria likely was not exerting herself significantly when she incapacitated Graf. She was acting on training and instinct. For her, it was routine: defend yourself, neutralize the threat, disengage. Just another ordinary evening. I submitted my report to station management. Captain Harrison of the human delegation submitted his as well. Security footage was reviewed independently by 3 supervisors. The conclusion was unanimous. Graf initiated contact. Victoria responded with proportional force given the threat. Case closed. No charges. Clear self-defense. But the incident did not stay quiet. Within 12 hours, everyone on Calera 9 knew that a human, specifically a small human female, had defeated Graf in a fight lasting under 5 seconds. The security footage was leaked. I will not assign blame, though it was almost certainly Ralph. The recording spread across every data pad and communication unit on the station. The change in attitude was immediate. Humans went from being dismissed as harmless to something else entirely. Respected is not quite accurate. Feared is closer. Pedestrians gave them space in corridors. Traders stopped attempting price manipulation. The informal betting pool within security was quietly disbanded, and several of us, including myself, felt considerable embarrassment. Graf's recovery was lengthy and unpleasant. His jaw had to be wired shut so fractured bones could heal. He consumed only liquids through a feeding tube for 3 months. His arm required 2 surgeries to repair bone and muscle damage. He was on medical leave for 4 months. When he returned, he was changed, quieter, more cautious. He no longer initiated conflicts or raised his voice. When asked what had happened, he reportedly said he learned an important lesson about respect. He also avoided the gravity well entirely. He could not tolerate being in the place where his reputation ended. Station management quietly introduced new procedures. Nothing formal or documented, but security personnel shared an understanding: if a human is involved in a confrontation, respond immediately. Do not wait for escalation. Humans were reclassified from low-threat to high-threat individuals and treated with the same caution as a Kragoth enforcer or Thranaki combat specialist. Victoria became something of a legend. People pointed her out, whispered as she passed. She handled the attention with the same composed professionalism she showed in all situations: still polite, still approachable, still helpful when asked. But now everyone understood that her courtesy was a choice, not a limitation. She effectively became an unofficial peacekeeper. I witnessed it repeatedly. Tensions would rise in the commercial district or cantas, voices elevated, postures aggressive. Victoria would arrive, coffee in hand, sometimes saying nothing at all. Her presence alone was enough to dissolve the conflict. No one wanted to become the next example. 3 months after the incident, I encountered her in the main concourse. She carried a data pad and her ever-present thermal coffee container. I nodded. She nodded back. "Quiet shift?" she asked. "Mostly thanks to you," I replied. "People have behaved better since you educated Graf about boundaries." She smiled slightly, the same restrained expression I remembered from our first meeting. "I did not intend to cause trouble," she said. "I only wanted him to stop grabbing me." I suggested she could have filed a formal complaint. She acknowledged that option but explained that where she came from, direct action is sometimes necessary. Words do not always deter bullies. Occasionally, they require more physical instruction. "Your world sounds severe," I said. "It is," she replied, "but it teaches valuable lessons: how to evaluate threats, how to defend yourself, and when to fight versus when to leave." Graf removed the option to walk away. I apologized for underestimating her people, for drawing conclusions based on appearance. She agreed, without hostility, simply stating the fact. "But you learned," she said, "and that is what matters. Most species eventually understand that humans are tougher than they appear. Your lesson was just more noticeable." She started to leave, then paused. "Vex," she said, "you do your job well. You keep this station safe. I respect that. If you ever need support, if things get serious, let me know." I watched her merge into the crowd. A small human who permanently altered how Calera 9 viewed her species. I thought about Graf, confined to liquid nutrition. I reflected on my own arrogance, on assuming size and strength defined combat capability. I thought about Earth, that lethal world producing generation after generation of survivors who learned to smile politely while carrying extraordinary capacity for violence. I made a mental note, one I have followed ever since. Never assume something small is weak. Never assume politeness means harmless. And under no circumstances should you grab a human by the collar. They genuinely do not appreciate it.